Ava Morgan had built empires from scratch. As the founder and CEO of a booming fintech company, she wasn't new to high-stakes meetings or complex negotiations. But nothing could have prepared her for the humiliating scene that played out inside the very bank where she had been a long-standing client and investor. She had arrived at Titan National Bank's flagship branch to authorize a high-value transfer for an urgent business acquisition. Dressed in a tailored navy suit and carrying documents that proved her identity, her presence should have commanded immediate respect. Instead, she was met with suspicion. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the assistant manager said with a rehearsed smile, tapping her keyboard. "There's a hold on your account. We can't authorize any transactions at this time." Ava's expression didn't flinch. "I own this account. I'm the CEO of the company this transfer is for. There's no reason to block it. Please escalate this." The assistant manager hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "I'll call the branch manager." Minutes later, the branch manager, a man in his early 50s with a stiff demeanor, arrived and repeated the same line. "It's just policy. We need further verification. Can you return tomorrow?" Ava leaned forward, voice calm but firm. "I don't need to return tomorrow. I need to know what's happening now. And I want the reason this hold was placed, in writing." Behind her, a few patrons had begun to glance in her direction. But Ava wasn't embarrassed, she was calculating. Something didn't add up. She stepped aside and dialed a number. "Janelle, get the internal counsel on the line. Also, pull the last 48 hours of transaction history from our private ledger. And tell security to ready the camera feeds from this branch." The bank manager paled slightly. Ava Morgan had just gone from client to strategist. And this game was far from over. Ava ended the call and turned slowly toward the branch manager, her voice controlled but unmistakably authoritative. "While we wait, I suggest you start gathering the logs of who accessed my account in the past 72 hours. I'll be requesting those through legal channels if necessary." The manager, now visibly nervous, stammered, "Ms. Morgan, I'm sure this is just a technical issue." "Then it won't take long to resolve," she cut in smoothly. Within minutes, her legal team was looped in. Janelle, her executive assistant, had already dispatched a compliance officer and Ava's personal attorney to the branch. Meanwhile, Ava remained seated in the private banking lounge, fielding live updates on her phone. Her counsel, a sharp attorney named Marcus Liu, arrived with calm precision and a briefcase full of leverage. "Ava, we did some digging. The hold wasn't flagged by your spending, or by any legitimate audit trigger. It came from inside this branch, a manual override." Ava's jaw clenched, but she nodded. "And the reason?" "They labeled the transaction suspicious, but didn't file any official SAR. That's a violation." That was all Ava needed to hear. She rose from the leather couch and walked directly to the manager's office, uninvited but unbothered. "You've got about 5 minutes to explain why my account was flagged without protocol, and why no one informed me through the proper channels." The manager tried to keep up the facade. "As I said, Ms. Morgan, it was a routine safeguard." Marcus stepped in. "Routine doesn't bypass verification protocol and internal compliance flags. Someone here made a judgment call that wasn't theirs to make." Ava narrowed her eyes. "And now I'll make mine." She pulled out her phone and opened a live stream, visible only to her private board of directors. "This is the bank blocking access to critical capital in the middle of a merger. I want full audit logs and employee access records by close of business today." The power dynamic shifted in an instant. The manager's face turned pale. He stuttered, "You can't just." "Oh, I can," Ava said, cool and composed. "And I just did." As word spread through the branch that Ava Morgan had just invoked legal counsel and a corporate audit, the tension in the building grew thick. Employees whispered behind monitors, glancing nervously toward the manager's office. Meanwhile, Ava stood with her arms folded, watching the branch manager struggle to maintain composure under pressure. Her phone buzzed. "Janelle." Audit team pulled the logs. The manual override came from a personal login. G. Burke, Assistant Regional Director. Not protocol. Ava's lips pressed into a thin line. Jeffrey Burke. She knew the name. He had been at a recent industry panel, preaching about data-driven banking integrity. Hypocrite. Without looking away from the manager, she forwarded the message to Marcus and spoke in a low, firm voice. "Get me Burke. Now." Marcus nodded and stepped out to make the call. The manager tried to recover. "Look, Ava, we're happy to clear the funds now. It seems there's been a mistake." She raised an eyebrow. "Mistake? You froze a multimillion-dollar transaction mid-acquisition, flagged my activity as suspicious without informing my company's compliance officers, and denied me access to my own capital. That's not a mistake. That's a liability. Just then a new voice joined the room. Ms. Morgan? A tall woman in a black blazer stepped forward, badge clipped to her lapel. I'm Dana Reed, senior investigator from your corporate counsel's compliance office. I've just reviewed your transaction history and the internal communications that led to the hold. I think you'll find the findings interesting. She handed Ava a tablet. On the screen were internal chat logs between Burke and another regional officer. Burke. She's moving fast. Flag the account. Buy us some time. Other officer. That's risky. What's the cover? Burke. Just label it irregular. No one will push it. Ava exhaled through her nose, her fury now laser-focused. She turned back to the manager. Your branch is now under formal review. Tell your staff to preserve all internal communications. Any attempts to delete data will be seen as obstruction. He opened his mouth to protest, but she cut him off. And call Burke. Tell him I'll see him in federal court. Or on the front page, whichever comes first. The bank manager was now visibly sweating. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the phone to call Jeffrey Burke, knowing full well this was no longer a matter of bank policy, but a crisis spiraling out of control. Across the lobby, Dana Reed coordinated quietly with Ava's legal and cybersecurity teams. Staff at the branch were instructed not to leave the building, pending a formal statement. Corporate compliance officers were en route to seize the branch's servers for forensic review. Ava stood at the center of it all, unshaken. Her phone rang. It was Burke. She answered calmly, putting the call on speaker. Miss Morgan, Burke's voice came through tight-clipped. Let's be reasonable. I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding. Ava smirked, already recording. You instructed your staff to interfere with a legal transaction between two corporations, without authorization. That's not a misunderstanding. That's corporate interference. Look, I can clear the hold right now, he said, tone suddenly friendlier. We'll even waive the transaction fees. I'm not interested in favors. I'm interested in accountability. Burke's tone shifted again. There's no need to escalate this. You know how messy these things can get in the press. Ava didn't blink. You should have thought about that before you tried to sabotage a CEO's access to her own money, at her own bank. She hung up. Turning to Marcus and Dana, she nodded. File the injunction. And notify the SEC. If he wanted time, I'll give him all the time he needs, to explain himself under oath. Outside the bank, two media vans were already parked across the street. News had leaked fast. Ava stepped outside with poise, cameras clicking, microphones extending in her direction. Ms. Morgan, can you comment on what just happened inside? She looked directly into the lens. What happened today is bigger than a denied transaction. It's about how certain institutions still believe they can bend the rules for their own convenience, until someone holds them accountable. Her phone vibrated. A notification, transfer approved. Too late. Ava smiled slightly, then added, this isn't about revenge. It's about reform. And we're just getting started. By the next morning, headlines were everywhere. Bank exec under fire after blocking CEO's funds without cause. Ava Morgan exposes broken internal controls at Titan National. Whistleblower leaks confirm deliberate sabotage attempt. Ava sat in her glass-walled office high above the city skyline, sipping coffee while watching financial news anchors debate the scandal. Stock in Titan National Bank had dipped overnight, nothing catastrophic yet, but enough to rattle shareholders. Her assistant Janelle stepped in. SEC confirmed receipt of our filings. Their enforcement division opened an investigation this morning. Also, Burke's office is suddenly vacant. Ava gave a quiet nod. An internal legal? Already working on a civil suit for financial interference. We've compiled damages and delays from the merger stall, plus reputational impact. Ava's expression hardened slightly. Make sure we include language about deterrence. I want this case to set precedent. Meanwhile, Titan National's board scrambled. Several board members reached out privately, some offering apologies, others floating settlements hoping to contain the fallout. Ava declined every offer. This isn't about compensation, she said to Marcus, seated across from her. It's about trust. If this happened to me, imagine how many others they've silenced who didn't have the resources to fight back. Marcus nodded. We've already had a dozen companies reach out, CEOs, startup founders, independent investors. All with similar stories. No one ever pursued it this far before. Ava leaned back in her chair, gaze sharp. Then they picked the wrong target. Her eyes turned toward the framed quote on the wall behind her desk. Read. Power isn't what you're given, it's what you refuse to let them take. Just then Janelle returned. Press wants a follow-up statement. Ava stood, adjusting her jacket. Let's give them one. She walked out onto the press platform, cameras flashing again. This time, her voice carried with clear conviction. To those who've been dismissed, delayed, or denied access to what you've earned, your voice matters. This isn't just my fight, it's ours. And it's not over. It had been 2 weeks since the incident at Titan National Bank, and the storm Ava Morgan set in motion was only growing. Jeffrey Burke had resigned under pressure, though Ava's legal team made sure his exit wasn't quiet. The public learned not just about his interference with Ava's account, but also about at least 3 other clients, startups and minority-led firms, whose funds had been mysteriously delayed or flagged under his oversight. Ava didn't celebrate. She calculated. In her office, Ava stood before a large digital map projected on the wall. It showed a network of data, banking complaints, flagged accounts, high-level overrides, patterns that revealed far more than Burke's isolated wrongdoing. Too many of these cases die quietly in legal backrooms, Marcus said as he reviewed the findings beside her. If we expose this system-wide, it'll rattle the entire sector. Ava nodded. That's the point. That evening she took the stage at the Global Finance Equity Forum, where hundreds of executives, regulators, and media figures had gathered. The crowd hushed as Ava approached the podium. I didn't come here to talk about what happened to me, she began. I came to talk about what we let happen to all of us. She outlined the reality, how institutions used obscure policies and internal flags to stall growth for disruptive companies, how gatekeeping still operated under polished branding, and how financial security reviews were often misused as tools of control. Then she made her announcement. My company is launching a new initiative, Clear Ledger. It's a transparency platform for entrepreneurs and clients to report and track blocked transactions, unexplained account actions, and denied access to capital, across all major banks. The crowd murmured. It will be supported by legal resources, compliance experts, and public data. And yes, we'll work with regulators. But most importantly, we'll work with each other. Because if they're counting on silence, we'll answer with community. The room broke into applause, sincere, sustained, growing. After the event, journalists swarmed her with questions, but Ava took only one from a young woman working at a small financial blog. What gave you the confidence to stand up to a billion-dollar institution? Ava smiled. Because I know where real value comes from, and it's not in their vaults. It's in the people they underestimated. Back at Titan National, the board of directors issued a formal apology. Too little, too late. Their clients were leaving. Stockholders were restless. And regulatory pressure mounted daily. Ava never set foot in that branch again. She didn't need to. Instead, she built something stronger than revenge. Accountability, transparency, and change. And in an industry where silence had once been the norm, her voice had become something impossible to ignore. 3 months after the confrontation at Titan National Bank, Ava Morgan's name was no longer just associated with innovation in fintech. It had become synonymous with institutional accountability. The launch of Clear Ledger had surpassed every forecast. What began as a transparency tool for flagging questionable banking actions evolved rapidly into a full-blown ecosystem. Encrypted case submissions, legal support hubs, automated audit triggers, and even integration with financial ethics watchdogs. More than 40,000 reports were submitted within the first 6 weeks. And the ripple effect was undeniable. Several major banks began issuing preemptive public reviews of their internal compliance systems. Others scrambled to revise their client service protocols, aiming to avoid the PR disasters that plagued Titan. The media called it the Morgan effect, a polite term for the very real fear now sitting in the boardrooms of institutions that once acted with impunity. But Ava was already 5 moves ahead. Inside her headquarters, she reviewed plans for the next Clear Ledger phase, a certification program for banks, scoring them on access equity, client treatment, and transaction transparency. Firms with high scores would be eligible for partnerships with Ava's fintech firm and investment fund. Those who refused? Their competitors wouldn't. This will force their hands, Marcus said, looking over the rollout plan. Either they reform from within, or they fall behind in the new capital environment. Ava nodded. We're not asking them to be perfect. We're demanding they stop hiding behind complexity. Accountability shouldn't be revolutionary. While the business world reeled, Ava's influence stretched further. Business schools began teaching her Titan case study and ethics courses. Lawmakers invited her to testify at financial oversight hearings. She accepted, not for attention but for policy change. At one such hearing, a senator asked her bluntly, "Do you believe this was ever personal?" Ava met his gaze evenly. "It wasn't personal until they underestimated me. Then it became a matter of principle." Later, back in her office, Ava reviewed a stack of letters, handwritten ones, from small business owners, students, and entrepreneurs. People who'd faced quiet financial blockades for years without recourse. One letter in particular stuck with her. "They made me feel powerless, like I didn't deserve to grow. What you did showed me we don't have to accept that anymore. Thank you for being louder than they were." Ava folded the letter and placed it in a leather-bound journal she kept locked in her drawer, not for strategy, not for show, but for fuel. She had turned a single denied transaction into a global call to action. She had held a mirror to the system, and forced it to look. And she was just getting started. Outside her window, the city moved forward, unaware of how close it had come to letting another injustice slip quietly into the shadows. But Ava made sure the spotlight stayed on. Not for revenge. For legacy. 6 months to the day after her confrontation with Titan National Bank, Ava Morgan stood once again on a stage, but this time, not to defend herself or expose corruption. This time she was being honored. The Global Integrity in Finance Awards had never seen a crowd so large or so diverse. Industry leaders, policymakers, activists, and entrepreneurs all gathered under one roof, not just to recognize Ava's work, but to acknowledge a shift she had helped ignite. As she approached the podium to accept the award, she paused briefly, scanning the room. Some of the same executives who had once doubted her now sat in the audience. Quiet, reflective, aware that the ground had shifted beneath their feet. "I didn't expect to be here because of a denied wire transfer," she said, prompting a wave of knowing laughter. "But looking back, maybe I should have. Power rarely shows up as a loud threat. Sometimes it's a quiet block on a screen. A passive decision. A silent gate." Her tone shifted. "But silence has always been the most dangerous part. And I refuse to stay quiet." She spoke not about punishment or even reform but about culture. About building systems that serve people, not policies. About making financial access a matter of fairness, not favors. And as she closed her speech, she left the room with a message that resonated far beyond the walls of the event. "They didn't block my money. They revealed their fear of people like me having unrestricted access to our own futures. That fear built their walls. Our voice tears them down. Every entrepreneur, every builder, every leader who's been dismissed, you're not too loud, too bold, or too much. You're just early. And that's exactly where change begins." A standing ovation followed, not just for the speech but for what it represented. The next day, Titan National announced the creation of a new independent ethics division, inspired by recent events. A few weeks later, Ava turned down their offer to sit on that very board. Her response? "I'm not here to fix your house. I'm building something better next door." ClearLedger would expand internationally the following quarter, with thousands of institutions requesting certification. The financial world was different now. Not perfect but no longer immune to scrutiny. And Ava Morgan, visionary, disruptor, and now reformer, had proven that the most powerful form of leadership isn't control. It's conviction.